Welcome to What is Truth, brought to you by the Southern New Mexico Church of God in Las Cruces, New Mexico. What is Truth is a weekly program which seeks to focus our attention on the truth of God's Word. Now, with this week's lesson, here's Pastor Meyer Stahl.
My guest today on the program is Rolf Mitchel. He was on our first program last week. Just in case you happen to miss last week's program, you can see it on the archives on Channel 98, Comcast, local TV station here. Welcome to the program, Rolf. He's an escapee of the Holocaust. We're happy to have you back on the program, Rolf.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, great. Would you just recap some of the things that led up to that we had on our last program about the bombing raid from at Ig Farben? Would you just tell us a little bit about that?
Well, what happened was this. The mission briefing for that bombing raid was given by a Colonel Putnam, who was the group commander of that unit. And he told everyone there, the participants in the bombing raid on the following day, that you fly where Mitchell tells you to fly. Is that understood? Yes, sir, was the universal reply. Well, we got up very early that next morning, 3 o'clock. We had breakfast. We got suited up. And the unit took off at 5 o'clock in the morning, still under darkness. And in order to confuse the Germans, not let them know beforehand where we were headed, we headed eastward across Denmark and into the Baltic Sea. And when we got to the island of Rügen in the Baltic, we made the turn to the south-southwest and headed to the southeastern outskirts of Berlin. Well, the Germans apparently finally got the message, and they started shooting ACAC anti-aircraft fire at us. Then the aircraft stopped, and the Me-109 fighters came after us. And I suddenly realized, Mitchell, what are you doing up here? But anyway, we continued on. We lost airplanes en route to the target. They were determined to defend that target. We picked up the rail line. We followed it. I pointed to the bombardier where that target was located. He spotted it, let the entire formation over the area, and it was a saturation raid, because I told him, if you saturate that whole area with bombs, you're going to hit them. You're going to hit more than one of the buildings. So we finished the raid. We banked left. We went back to England, lost some more airplanes en route, and obviously we got back safely. And I stayed with the unit that night, and my own unit picked me up the next morning, and I went back and rejoined the 37th Tank Battalion. 2 days later, while we were all in the mess tent, the regimental commander walked in, the battalion commander walked in, and all the officers, and the regimental commander gets up on the table and he says, well, one of you guys really did a job the other day, and he's looking right at me. And said, oh gosh, what have I done now? And he ordered the adjutant to read the intelligence report. And the intelligence report in effect stated, not one brick left standing on top of the other. I was happy. And then the regimental commander let the cat out of the bag, and that's when I found out what was going on in that factory. He says the reason that it was such a high priority target is we found out that that was the factory making the chemicals that were used in the gas chambers. And when I heard that, I almost passed out, because I lost my entire family in those gas chambers and lost my mother from exposure to the chemicals that they were producing. And what made me even more angry was here was a Jewish woman, a professional, a dentist by profession, being forced to make chemicals to kill thousands upon thousands of other Jews.
Actually, millions, Rolf.
Yes.
Actually, would you show us some of the awards that you got, those TITACs? Well, we'll come back to them later.
Yeah.
We'll come back to them later.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
go ahead.
And I was assigned, as I mentioned, to the 37th Tank Battalion. We landed after the invasion at Utah Beach. We did not land the division until July. And the beach had been secured, and our initial objective was to isolate the Brittany Peninsula, because at the tip of the peninsula was the German naval base in Brest, and also the German submarine base at Saint-Nazaire. We cut the entire peninsula off in a matter of a few days, and in the process not only isolated the two naval bases, but we trapped either 3 or 4 German divisions that were there. And they had no choice but to surrender. So we proceeded through France, and at one point, the tank that I was in, I was a tank commander, was hit in the side, but it damaged the tank, but all of us were safe because all it did was to knock off the track on the left side of the tank and the bogie wheels. So we just got another tank and kept on going. We were in south of Paris. We were part of 3rd Army, General Patton's army, and kept advancing, kept advancing. We got hit again in the front of the tank, and at that time I lost my driver and assistant driver. They got killed by the hit. I got 2 replacements, and we kept on going. We got to Metz, and we were ordered to halt. Metz in the eastern part of France. And we were told to stand by. We were resupplied, and we received orders to proceed at all possible speed northward to the town of Bastogne and relieve the 82nd Airborne Division that was entrapped there by the Ardennes Offensive, which was commonly referred to as the Battle of the Bulge. And in the process, we bypassed Metz. We left it behind, and we'll figure we'll get it later. And we covered 96 miles in a 24-hour period in order to reach Bastogne and relieve the 82nd Airborne Division. It was a real happy bunch of guys that we met there.
Would you tell us about the tank that blew up there, with the hatch?
After Bastogne, we captured Metz. We were resupplied again, and we headed east into Germany. We were supposed to go towards Saarbrücken. We encountered an SS Panzergrenadier division there, and were in heavy combat. And for whatever reason, I still don't know to this day, I went into that action with a hatch, the turret hatch, open. And it turned out it saved my life, because our tank got hit in the rear where it was most vulnerable. The engines were back there, the fuel tanks were back there, and when we were hit, the tank blew up. And I was propelled by the explosion out through that open hatch and landed several yards away. The tank was ablaze, and the first thing in my mind was I was going to go in there and rescue the crew. And if it hadn't been for 3 infantrymen that were with us that kept me from going there, I probably would have perished in there with it. But as it turned out, I was the only survivor. And losing your crew is a very hard thing to take.
Wow, that was some story. Why are you here today, Rolf, explaining this history to us today? What's the purpose?
Well, the world is still in turmoil. And obviously, the people of the world, particularly some of the leaders, haven't learned the history of the world. My idea about relating all of this is that we shouldn't repeat history. Because if we continue to repeat history, we're going to wipe ourselves out.
So you are fearful of the future, where the United States of America is going. Is that true?
Well, I'm fearful in that we don't seem to be able to cooperate one another. We fight each other, when the thing to do is to give and take and make the country the best that we can possibly make it. Stop the strife.
I agree. I agree with you, Rolf. So listen, folks, we have two very important booklets that we are offering today. The first is, why do you observe Sunday? The Bible teaches the observance of the Sabbath. Now, I have a check here. I have a check here for $10,000. You see that? Then it says paid to the order of, it's blank. You can have this check. All you need to do is bring your King James Bible to the studio. Show me clearly that Sunday is the Sabbath day, or the first day of the week is now the Sabbath day in either the Old Testament or the New Testament, and I will sign right here at the bottom, put your name on pay to the order of, and you could have this check for $10,000. Now, previously, we offered this check for $5,000, so we're upping the ante. Now, the second booklet is God's Holy Days. Did you know that God has holy days that reveal his plan of salvation? I'm going to read on the front. Man has substituted his holidays, Christmas, Easter, New Year's Day, and many more for God's holy days. Because of this, man has lost sight of God's wonderful plan of salvation and man's true destiny. Now, you can have these two booklets. You can have a DVD of this program for free. We have nothing to sell on the program, and we'd be happy to send them to you. Just call the number that you see on the screen. We also have an interactive Bible study. Interactive means you can interact. You can ask questions as we go along and explain things. We have it at the Montana Senior Center, 355 Montana Street at 1 o'clock every Saturday. That's 355 Montana. It's right around the corner from the Taco Bell on El Paseo. So please join us. All you need to do is just bring a Bible and bring a notebook and a pen. That's all you need. And you could join us every Saturday at 1 o'clock. Now we're back to the program. Rolf, do you have some few things that you would like to add?
Post-war.
The post-war. Tell us something about the post-war in your life.
What happened when the war ended, nobody needed tank jockeys anymore. And it was suggested to me, because of my background, that I cross-train into the military police. I went along with that. Went to Fort Custer, Michigan, trained as a military policeman, and was shipped back overseas to Europe. And at the replacement depot, I had my choice of where I wanted to go. And when a whole bunch of units were listed, I asked the lieutenant there, I said, where are these units located? Well, one was in Vienna, they were in Frankfurt, in Bremerhaven, in Munich. And when he got to the one in Berlin, I said, that's where I want to go.
Okay, hold that. Hold that right there. We'll be right back. Don't move. We'll be right back with another exciting story. Rolf, would you explain, take up the rest of the story and explain us from Berlin that you were stationed now after the war? Go ahead. Yeah. You tell us.
Well, it was really funny because I wound up being stationed with a military unit that was right around the corner from where we used to live.
Yeah.
And the first day in Berlin, I made it a point to go back to the old neighborhood and thank the family that lived in the adjoining apartment from us for looking after my mother after I had departed. And the strange thing was I had intended to ask for the brother whom I played with when I was still a youngster living there, and what came out was, is Edith still there? And I hardly knew her. Well, we formed a friendship. And I served my time over there in occupation duty. I was an operations NCO for that particular military police company, came back, was discharged, and went to work for the federal government. Then I had hearing problems. And when we moved to Washington, D.C., for employment there for the federal government, there was an ear, nose, and throat doctor that told me that they had arrived at a procedure that could restore my hearing. I went ahead and went through the procedure, one of them in 1964 on the left ear, 1965 on the right ear, and had better than normal hearing. And I always wanted to emulate my father, so I learned to fly. And I learned to fly, got my license, and at the time I was working for Headquarters Air Force in the Data Automation Design Center, developing computer systems for the Air Force worldwide. And the commanding officer came to me one day and he says, Rolf, you ought to go join Civil Air Patrol now that you're a flyboy. What's Civil Air Patrol? Well, it's the Air Force Auxiliary. They have a senior program for adults. They have a cadet program. They do all of the search and rescue missions for the Air Force. They do disaster relief. He said, you'll be good at that. Well, I went and joined. Joined the squadron that was just 3 blocks away from where we lived. And about a month later, the wing commander walked in during a meeting, fired the squadron commander, and made me squadron commander. And oh my God, what am I getting into? Well, it turned out quite well. I progressed, and when the wing commander was replaced, the new wing commander asked me to be his deputy. And I moved up to become the deputy commander of the National Capital Wing in Washington, D.C. We had 12 squadrons in the D.C. area. I was on search and rescue missions, found targets several times. As a matter of fact, I was the pilot of the airplane, along with 2 observers, that found the wreckage of the airplane in which Audie Murphy, the war hero from the Italian campaign, was killed when it crashed. And in 1972, I went to the Transpo 72, an air show in which the Air Force Thunderbirds performed. I got acquainted with them. In 1974, I met them again in Washington, D.C. And in 1976, when there was a bicentennial air show at Andrews Air Force Base, I was made a member of the committee. And I was asked if I would take the commander and the 2 solo pilots of the Air Force Thunderbirds on their orientation flight in a light airplane. And I did that. And it worked extremely well. When we moved to St. Augustine in Florida, I did 3 air shows for the Air Force Thunderbirds as air show director. And the final one is 1986. And in recognition, the commander of the Air Force Thunderbirds presented me with this tie tack. Later on, I became quite well acquainted with the German Air Force Command, which controls all the German Air Force activities in the United States and Canada. The commander of that at the time was a former commander of the 71st Fighter Wing, which bears the name Richthofen. And before he went back to Germany, he came to our house for dinner, and he presented me with something that only a current or former commander of that wing is authorized to present. It's a sterling silver tie clasp that has the Red Baron's triplane on it. In fact, even the propeller moves. And he presented that to me, and I was flabbergasted. And I was told later that no higher honor could have been paid me. And I treasure that. And for special occasions, I wear that.
Please show the tie tack on your tie. Let's get a close-up of that. That's it.
This is the tie tack that was presented me in August 1986 by Colonel Roger Ricks, who at the time was commander of the Air Force Thunderbirds, to thank me for being the air show director in St. Augustine, Florida, for the Thunderbirds in 1984, 85, and 1986.
Wow. Well, let's get back to the story. How'd you meet your wife again?
Well, I met my wife when I was first assigned to Berlin for occupation duty in April 1946. And we became well acquainted. It was love at first sight, honestly. And she tells the same story, that she saw me there and she came over, she gave me a hug and a kiss, and afterwards she tells the story that I found my life's partner. I was sent back early before I was due to come back to the United States because of my hearing problems. So I was sent back early, and she had to follow me by American Overseas Airlines. I paid for the ticket. She got her visa with some help from President Truman, I might add. And I met her at LaGuardia International Airport in New York. We went back to St. Louis. We got married on the 4th of May, 1948, and were very happily married for 62 years. And unfortunately, she passed away in late February of 2010, and I miss her dearly.
Wow, what a wonderful story, Rolf. Thanks for coming here today with that wonderful story. We have, again, 2 booklets that we are giving away free. The first booklet is Why Do You Observe Sunday? The Bible teaches the observance of the Sabbath day. And of course, we have that check here for $10,000 for anyone who can bring their King James Bible right here to the studio and show us plain, clear, that the Sabbath is on the first day of the week, that it's on Sunday. And the second booklet is God's holy days. Did you know that God has holy days that reveal his plan of salvation? Call the phone number on the screen, and we would be happy to send them to you at no charge, free. You could have a DVD of this program for free. And this is Meyer Stahl of the Southern New Mexico Church of God saying until next time, goodbye, my friends.
You have been listening to What is Truth with Pastor Meyer Stahl of the Southern New Mexico Church of God, located in Las Cruces, New Mexico. For copies of today's lesson or for more information, call area code 575-650-7359. That's 575-650-7359. Join us next week at this same time for another edition of What is Truth? Until next week, we wish you God's richest blessings.